My name is Will. I am the Executive Director at the Royal Court, and I will be the main voice you'll be hearing, so apologies if you get sick of it by the end of an hour. Firstly, I'm just going to do a couple of quick bits of housekeeping for everyone. So we think the session will last up to an hour and 15. That will probably depend a little bit on questions at the end. Please feel free to come and go and engage with the session however suits you best. There's no pressure to have cameras on or microphones on at any point. Although if a few people do keep them on so that I can see some human faces while I'm speaking, that makes it a slightly more pleasant experience as a presenter. And just to be absolutely clear, you should have received this information in advance, but the session is being recorded. That will only really impact you if you choose to ask a question sort of directly by unmuting. But there will be a recording available for people to view afterwards, and we're expecting that to be available by the end of next week. There is BSL interpretation available throughout, and firstly, a huge thanks to Lixie and to Anna, who are our BSL interpreters for today. If you are someone who wants BSL interpretation, you should find on your Zoom menu, alongside the sort of audio and video and participants and chat options, an option which might be under the three little dots called More, for turning interpretation on, and that will then appear as a window on top of the main window, which you can move around and put wherever suits you. Under the same menu is an option to turn on captioning for anyone who would like captions. The chat function will be live throughout the session, and that will be a place where you can add any questions you have as we go. We'll take most questions at the end, and there'll also then at the end be an option for you to take a moment and think and work out if you have anything more you want to ask. So you can also ask questions at the end, but feel free to put them in the chat as we go and as they occur to you. I will say we're not going to respond to questions in the chat, and we'd ask people not to get into a sort of back and forth exchange in the chat in order that the whole event remains as accessible and clear for everyone as possible. Rachel Welsh, who is our Director of Marketing and Communications, will be managing questions and will look at raising them in the session when we come to questions, to ensure that everyone can hear them clearly. I'll also therefore just do a couple of introductions, one of which is to Rachel Welsh, who will be the voice of questions. Rachel, are you around? Would you unmute and say hello?
Hi everyone. Yeah, I'm Rachel. I'll be monitoring the chat, keeping an eye on what questions are in there. If some of them are similar themes, similar questions, I'll group them all together and I'll then be responsible for asking Will those questions at the end. You can either pop it straight in the chat so that everybody can see your question, or you can send it directly to me. You'll be able to see I've got Q&A in brackets next to my name, so you can easily find me in the chat to send me any questions. But yeah, thank you so much, and I'll be back in touch.
Thanks, Rachel. The other member of our team on the call is Natalie, who is the Artistic Director's Office Manager. She is, in fact, hosting this through the Artistic Director's account. So Natalie's account will appear on your screen as David Byrne. But should you have any technical issues or other questions, feel free to drop Natalie on David Byrne a direct message as well. All right. So thank you again, and hopefully this will be a useful session to talk through for anyone who is interested in thinking about or understanding more about the new Jerwood Royal Court commissioning scheme, which we announced last month and for which applications opened on Tuesday of this week and run through till January. The Jerwood Royal Court commissioning scheme is a new open application national fund that we put together to encourage and support ambitious play commissioning, aiming to increase investment and support for new writing on stages across the UK beyond the Royal Court. Each year, starting in 2026, the scheme will make 6 annual grants of between £4,000 and £6,000. They will be intended to underwrite the first instalment of new play commissions between writers and theatres or producing companies across the country. It's the first time we've taken this approach to supporting commissioning, rather than just focusing our commissioning funds on plays intended directly for our own stage. It's an attempt to share that resource and support a wider field of people being able to access routes to commissioning. We know that times are tough, and it has never felt harder for programmers and producers to push for the riskier choice of commissioning genuinely original work. And we're seeing, both in the report that came out this week, a decline in new plays and often people moving towards revivals and adaptations. We want to help turn that tide for a generation of artists and audiences, and we know that there is huge appetite among the artistic and leadership teams of theatres and producing companies across the country to commission more. And we hope that this scheme can be a small amount of support to help move that dial for some people. As I say, the scheme will launch next year. Applications are now open, so the first grants will be made by March of next year as part of our 70th anniversary, but we are then committed to running it annually. So if you get to the end of this session and feel like you're not quite ready or it's not quite for you, it's really worth still thinking about this information because we will be running the scheme again next year. The aims of the scheme, I suppose, are to support not just new plays happening, but support a commitment to the Royal Court's artistic values, which we articulate here as artistic freedom, innovation, dissonance, and ambition. For us, that means the ability of writers to platform controversial views, to explore things that involve mess and uncertainty, or present topics ahead of public and peer consensus and general current discourse. In terms of innovation, we think about that encouraging experimentation and risk, whether that's in form or content, and protecting artists' right to fail. We think about dissonance in terms of finding strength in contradictions and contrasts, particularly in polarized times, and ambition in terms of providing rigorous and abundant support for big imaginations and bold artistic visions. We know that those values will mean different things in different contexts. They might mean different things, and different ones might feel more important to you if you're working on a piece that intends a commercial route to production, or within a rural touring project, or as part of a community-based practice. So we don't have a set version of what we think those things should mean for you, but we're looking for writers for whom some aspect of that resonates and to articulate what that means in their context. For us, the particular way the scheme has been designed is supporting routes to production theatres across the country. The intention of the scheme is not only to support commissioning, but to support routes for those new plays to themselves be produced. And that's why the applications for the scheme are restricted to joint applications between a producer, whether subsidised, whether a venue, whether commercial or independent, but between a producing entity and a playwright, with a joint aim to take that project forward. I should say that alongside the support of Jerwood Foundation towards resourcing some of this funding, we're really grateful to be partnering with the Writers Guild of Great Britain. The Writers Guild will not only be supporting us in terms of ensuring fair terms for writers throughout the process, but also ultimately provided the biggest part of the inspiration for this scheme. Their own one-off new play commissioning scheme, run in the wake of the pandemic, was intended to achieve just this, which was supporting not just new plays being commissioned, but encouraging venues and producers to back commissioning new plays. And a lot of the scheme has drawn on the impact and the evaluation from that fund, as well as our conversations across the wider sector. So, as I said, grants are made between £4,000 and £6,000, and that's because those are roughly the amounts of the first payments on commissioning agreements, often called the signature payment, for commissioning new plays under a range of different Writers Guild approved commissioning standards. The grants will be paid to the producing partner, and for successful applications, that producing partner will then be responsible for both entering into a full commission with the writer and paying over that first grant amount to that first payment amount to them, but also, and it's really important to underline this for anyone applying, that producing partner is then responsible for the delivery fee on the play, and if they go forward into production, for future production costs. We should also be really, really clear that grants are not a commission from the Royal Court, and we are not expecting to take any kind of control over future rights or decisions. We'll ask to be kept informed and to be involved in the development of the piece, but ultimately, the commission will belong to the joint applicant, so the writer and the producing partner, with absolute freedom to do whatever they want, and if at some point they decide to, tell us to leave them alone. So when I say that grant amounts are between £4,000 and £6,000, as I say, that's because we're aware that commissioning agreements vary according to context. And so they are all intended to cover the relevant minimum Writers Guild commissioning rates. In fact, they're all set at slightly over that amount, partly in order to provide for a simple grant amount, partly because depending on the years in which commissions actually take place, those amounts can change. So it should be enough to allow for the full first payment, whether that is a commission that's paid over this financial year or next financial year. The 4 different grant amounts available are equivalent to the minimum Writers Guild rates under the 4 most common commissioning agreements currently in the country. So they are the ITC or UK Theatre MRSL1 or equivalent agreements, where it's around £6,000. The TNC Writers Guild agreement, where it's £5,000. UK Theatre MRSL2 or equivalent, which is £5,000, or UK Theatre MRSL3 or equivalent, which is around £4,000. If you're someone on this webinar already confused and worried about which rate applies to you as a writer, please don't worry. I would hope that as part of the application, if a writer is working with a producing partner, that producing partner should know either which of those agreements apply to them, and that will depend partly on what sort of membership organisations they're part of, or roughly what the equivalent rate is for the context in which they're working. And if you're still uncertain, you can read extensive guidance on the Writers Guild website or drop the Writers Guild a line, and they'll always advise whether a part of this scheme or independently, producers and writers on what sorts of rates and agreements should be applicable. For short plays, so if you were applying for a play under 70 minutes, under some of those agreements, the commissioning amounts are slightly lower, and we might reduce grant amounts in that case. So as I say, if you're unsure which rates or agreements apply to you, then you can consult with the Writers Guild. You can also talk to UK Theatre and or ITC, the Independent Theatre Council, who are the primary membership bodies across the country, and will know which rates apply to their members. You might not be a member of either UK Theatre or the ITC, and therefore you might not be bound by a formal set of minimum rates and agreements, and you might have your own in-house agreement, in which case you can select the rate that most closely aligns. If you are commissioning according to a non-standard and non-template Writers Guild agreement, that's absolutely fine. But please bear in mind that if you are successful in receiving a grant, then the Writers Guild will have a moment to look at the contract that that's under and will need to provide approval before any grant is released, ensuring not only that the minimum rates of pay are met, but so too are the minimum standard terms and fair conditions for writers involved. I should also say, and the Writers Guild would be very angry with me if I didn't say, that these are minimum rates. And while they're absolutely the minimum standard rates that are acceptable across the country, we know that some producers do choose to contract at higher rates. That is not only fine, but brilliant, and we love more support going towards writers. However, to be absolutely clear that if you choose to contract at higher rates, then that's the responsibility of the producing partner to make up any additional balance. So, how to apply? So the online portal on our website opened this week and is open from now until the 23rd of January. It's really important to say that we won't be able to accept applications either in any other format other than via our own online portal or outside of those dates. I believe we've explicitly said that the deadline on the 23rd of January is midnight, providing you every possible minute up to the deadline of 23rd of January, but we won't be able to accept late applications purely in order to have the time to process them and get back to people. As I mentioned earlier, it's an annual scheme. So if you don't feel like you're ready to make an application on that timeline, that's absolutely fine, and you can apply to the next round. I would say, with that in mind, it's worth taking some time to prepare the best application possible, particularly those of you who've joined today, who have plenty of time to do that between now and the 23rd of January. There's no need to get it in quicker, and that won't make any difference to how it's assessed. I would think about ensuring you have a really confirmed, solid partnership between the playwright and the producing partner, and that the two of you have really discussed the artistic proposal, as well as how you'd ideally produce it if the application is successful and if the commission goes well. And if you don't have a clear enough plan, you can always come back next year. Once you feel clear on that, I'd encourage you to read the full application guidance and details around our aims for the scheme, which is all available on our website. And later on in this session, I'll show you where to find all of that information. If you have further questions, we've also provided extensive FAQs. We obviously have this webinar, and there's an email address where you can contact us if you still feel like there's something you need to ask that isn't addressed. Once you start an application on our portal, which is very short, they won't be able to be saved and returned to. It's a very, very light touch application process that works like it's a short survey with only 4 written questions that you need to respond to outside of sort of applicant details and monitoring information. In order to support that, we've provided all of the questions available to be downloaded in advance on our website in a Word document, so you can look at them in advance and prepare answers before having to go onto the form if you prefer to do so, and I'd really advise having a look at that before you apply. The assessment process will include a shortlisting through our panel of internal artistic team and associates, and then all shortlisted applicants will be invited to an interview in February of 2026. That interview will require both the playwright and a representative of the producing partner to attend, to answer further questions and talk through their plans in more detail with our teams. At the point of shortlisting, we will also request a previous script or writing sample from the writer in order to support that conversation and mean that we can best engage with your work. If applicants have access needs, we have tried to address as much as we can in the early stages with the way that guidance is provided. So the guidance is available in written English, in audio format, in large print, and in BSL. If you're invited to interview, we can also cover the costs of BSL interpreters or any other necessary adjustments as part of ensuring that that interview process is accessible. All applications, in any case, must be made in writing via the portal. And if there are other access needs as part of ensuring that the application is as strong as possible, we would expect the producing partner to be able to provide that support. And that's really important to underline, because if successful, we would expect the producing partner to be able to provide whatever access support is required for the writer involved, in order that beyond the application itself, they can ensure the commission is delivered successfully and positively. And if you have any other queries or additional barriers and requests, you can always email us on commissioningscheme@royalcourttheatre.com. I'm going to talk through eligibility now, before we get into the main application process. So, as I said at the start, applications must be made as a partnership between a playwright and a producing venue or company with a shared intention towards future production. So the application form will ask for details of both parties, and any agreements for a confirmed grant will be a three-way agreement between us as the grant funder, the writer, and the producer. Each playwright and producing partner can only be lead applicants in one application in each annual funding round. That doesn't mean that you might not be involved in other things. For example, a writer could be also involved as a dramaturg with another writer who's applying, or could be a director or collaborator on another project. Equally, a producing partner might be the lead commissioning partner on one application, but could also be a host venue or a co-producing partner for another. But each playwright and producing partner can only be the lead applicant in one application in each funding round, and that will be who is named on the application form. In order to apply, the producing partner must be a UK-based organisation or venue with a track record of producing new theatre and sufficient reserves or budgets to at least guarantee the delivery fee, which is a contractual requirement for a commissioning agreement. That producing partner should be a UK-based company or charity, whether subsidised, independent or commercial, and with some form of clear record and company registration, but cannot be an individual freelance producer. The playwright, for the purposes of an application, must be UK-based and must be aged over 18 at the point of application. You must have some demonstrable track record as a writer. It's really important to say that we're not setting limits on what that means, nor defining a particular context. A track record doesn't mean that you've previously been commissioned. It might not mean that you've had work on at major venues, although it could do, but that you're able to demonstrate some basis for your craft as a playwright. We also want this fund to be encouraging new investment in work. And that's why we're saying that you cannot previously be a playwright. You cannot be a playwright who has previously received a full commission from the producing partner. Again, that's not intended to be enforced in a sort of overly harsh way. And that could involve a lot of different relationships that pre-exist between the producing partner and the writer. For example, producers who previously presented or produced work they haven't commissioned by that writer, or have been working with that writer in talent development schemes, or on seed commissions for other projects, or in festivals or other contexts. But you can't apply as a joint producing partner and playwright if the two have previously entered into a full standard commissioning agreement before, because the goal here is to incentivize people to develop new projects that they might not otherwise have done. The play, or your proposal for the play you wish to commission, must be an entirely original piece of work, not based on any underlying material, whether copyrighted or otherwise. The goal of this scheme is to support the commissioning of original non-adaptation plays. Again, There may be some grey areas in that, and we know that sometimes people might write a fully original work that is nonetheless in some way inspired by something else in existence, and you'll have a sense as a writer of where that line sits. And all I would say is that while we will try to be as open and inclusive as possible, if you're skirting the edge of eligibility criteria, while we treat the application as eligible, the chances are it might not look like a very strong adaptation, a very strong application, if it feels like it largely leans on forms of adaptation. It can be a project that you've already been talking about or undertaken some initial development around, so long as it's not already been commissioned and there isn't any other formal agreement in place that would cover the rights to that work. We've had several questions about co-writing and collaborations, and so to be absolutely clear, when we talk about a playwright, that can absolutely include a co-writing partnership or collaborative processes in making work. However, the way you structure that needs to be suitable for a commissioning agreement under Writers Guild terms. And for the application form, one writer should be nominated as the lead playwright in order that we are able to go through interview processes and sign grant agreements with a single party. If you are entering into co-writing and collaborative approaches, do consider whether there are additional costs and whether or not the producing partner is able to meet them. And we'd also strongly recommend that you read the advice on the Writers Guild website around entering into collaborative processes, including their recommendations around entering into a collaborative agreement between those collaborating partners in order to avoid issues and confusion around rights later down the line. So in terms of how we'll be assessing applications, each application will be assessed against 4 criteria, which will roughly track the questions that I'll show you later as part of the form. One question is artistic quality, so how strong we think the proposal is, how exciting it is. The second is around risk and ambition, so thinking about how it meets the aims of the scheme, where the aim includes to be supporting genuinely risky and ambitious work that might not otherwise have a route to commissioning. Thirdly, the likelihood of production. So while we know that there are never any guarantees when a commission is entered into that the show will be produced, we want to be supporting commissions where it feels like both parties have a really meaningful shared route to production if the application is successful and if the commission is going well. And then fourthly, we'll look overall at the application against the aims of the scheme, and you can look at the full articulation of those on our website. We'll also include some balancing criteria to ensure that we consider the range of successful applicants, and that will include the diversity of the selected playwrights, the gender parity of the selected playwrights, and the geographical spread of the producing partners. And there'll be a short monitoring form as part of the application where you can respond to those questions in order to support us balancing decisions and making sure that we are genuinely supporting a diverse range of playwrights and contexts across the country. All applicants will hear back from us one way or another by Friday, the 13th of February. That could include letting you know we're not able to take your application forward, or with an invitation to interview for shortlisted candidates, as well as at that point a request for some more information and a sample of previous scripts. All shortlisted candidates should receive the final outcome within 1 week of their interview, and all decisions will be final. We are not able to provide feedback to everyone who applies, but we will provide feedback to anyone invited to the interview stage. If you're successful, there'll be a letter of agreement which needs to be signed by the 31st of March, and payment will be made on completion of an appropriate commissioning agreement, including approval with the Writers Guild where appropriate. As I say, there are no rights to the Royal Court or other requirements as part of the development of the work. However, we will ask for 4 things, which will be covered in a short letter. 1, as stated, is approval of the commissioning agreement by the Writers Guild. 2 is crediting the support of the scheme, both in full production stage and if there are other public sharings of the work. Thirdly, we'll be asking everyone who applies to input into evaluation, and for successful candidates that will involve more follow-up questions further down the line to understand how the grant affected your work. And then fourthly, we'll be asking for just updates and invitations in order that we can see the development of the work and the production of the work if it goes ahead. As I say, full terms will be detailed in the grant offer letter, and there's more detail around each of those areas also available on our website. So I'm going to stop screen sharing this presentation, and I'm going to go to our website in order to be able to show you some more information. So if you have left this call and decided you want to go and apply, the best thing to do is head straight to our website. And you'll find this scheme alongside all of the other programs we offer to support writers nationwide under the Write and Create section of our website. Under Write and Create, you'll see that we have subsections for writers, for directors, and for schools and young people. We actually also currently have the information on this scheme on the main Write and Create landing page, so you can navigate to it straight from there, or you can go into the writers section and go to the Jerwood Royal Court Commissioning Scheme. This section of our website has everything you will need in order to make an application. So alongside all the details I've discussed, there are 3 main pages. One is about the scheme, and this has a detailed explanation of like the aims of the scheme, all the things I've talked about, but with more information available to read if you want. Information about access, more detail on grant conditions for successful awards, and some information, again, thanking our partners, Jerwood Foundation and the Writers Guild of Great Britain. Under how to apply, you'll find a detailed description of things like eligibility, assessment criteria, shortlisting, and the full terms and conditions for the award. But this is also where you'll find all of the information in a set of attachments. So you can download a full applicant guidance pack, which is a 14-page document that provides everything you need, that's also included across the website. And it's also where you can download the application form and questions as a Word doc to look at in advance. You can also access here a range of accessible guidance formats, so you can watch the guidance in a BSL video, you can listen to an audio recording of the guidance, or you can download the written guidance in a large print format. You can also here find the link to the webinar that you've joined, but also an extensive set of FAQs, which hopefully will answer a lot of questions you might have. And we're continuing to add to those FAQs, so where we're getting questions through on email that we think might be relevant to other people, we're adding things, including we had a note yesterday asking whether or not character counts on the form included spaces, to which I have to say, yes, sorry, they do. And that's now been updated on the guidance questions as well. So just going back to the how to apply section, there is available here a range of different documents. As I say, I'm just going to show you 2 of them that I think are relevant to look at. So firstly, if you download the full guidance pack, just screen share this. So you'll find a full document you can download, which has all of the information I've just outlined written down, probably far more clearly than I've articulated it here, across 14 pages. And that has everything you will need. So you can find all of this information across our website, but you can also just download this document, and that has all of the key information you'll need to make an application. Alongside that, as I say, we would strongly recommend that people have a look at the application form questions in advance and potentially use the offline document to prepare before going to the online portal. So this is just a very simple Word document, and it outlines the questions that will be asked on the portal. So that includes, under the first section, basic details. So that will include the name of the project, which would most likely be a working title for the play, but might just be Untitled Play. And then a range of information on the applicant. So if you're a playwright, we're asking for name, address, contact details, information if there are co-writers or collaborators, and either an attachment or a link to a CV or bio for a playwright. So that could be a link, an attachment you want to upload, or it could be a link to an agent's page or your own website or anywhere else that provides some clear information about your background as a writer. For the producing partner, again, similar details. We need the name of the partner, address, a named individual as part of the application, email contact details, and then information on the type of company that you are, and if you are a registered charity, and any company registration details. That can be, as I say, taking a range of formats. So it could include Companies House or Charity Commission, could also include the Scottish and Northern Irish charity registers, or any other relevant information for the registration of the company. And then similarly, alongside the CV or link for the playwright, we'll just ask for a website or other relevant link to give us more information on the producing partner. And we'll also be asking you to upload the previous year's accounts. Ideally, that would be the last financial year's statutory accounts where they're available, or otherwise your most recent accounts in any other relevant form, in order that we can get a sense of the context in which the company is working and ensure that we're supporting projects where the producer has sufficient funds and reserves in order to support the next steps for the project. There are then just 4 actual written questions for the application itself and that will be assessed, and they are each subject to a character count of 2,000 characters, including spaces. So they're not very long, and we're not asking for huge amounts of information. So those questions are: one, what is your proposal for the play, which will be where you can give us a sense of where you've got to and what the idea or outline, as far as you know it at this point, is, and what the plan is for the commission. Secondly, why you're applying. So asking why you think your proposal fits with the ambitions of the scheme, and particularly areas of risk or ambition, or why you think the project needs the additional support from this scheme to secure commissioning. Thirdly, your expected route to production. So again, we know that that will never be certain, but a sense of what the goal is to work towards in order to secure production, which could include elements of the producing partner's track record, as well as any known information on planning to date, timescale, likely venues, or other partners or creatives. And then fourthly, just in case you feel like you haven't been able to sufficiently answer any questions within that character count, we've allowed a fourth box where you can add any more information that you think would support the application. There'll then be a short series of monitoring questions, so asking which commissioning agreement you're sitting under, information about the diversity of the playwright's gender identity, the producing partner's location, and then our terms and conditions around evaluation and grants. That's all we're asking anyone to look at, but again, I would really recommend that you download that document in advance and use it to write your application so that going onto the portal is as quick and smooth as possible. Stop sharing that, and I will finally just go back once more to our website, where you will have seen that almost every page of the commissioning guidance on our website has a very big capitalized link to the portal. So from any page there, you can click on that link, and that will take you to the portal, which again just reminds you to read the guidance and download the questions in advance. And follows, you'll all have seen things like this before, it's just made on Typeform, a really simple flow where you can begin answering questions and move through the different sections and just provide all the information that you'll need. So that is the end of my whistle-stop tour through the guidance for the scheme and where you can find it. And now I am open for questions. Rach, I thought I was going to take longer and was prepared to leave a moment for everyone to have a break, but do you think we can crack straight into questions? I've been able to see that the chat has been filling up.
Yeah.
I think there are questions.
I think there's a great place to start with questions, which is a common question that's been asked, which is around basically how developed can a project be and how much informal presentation can it have had before while still remaining eligible. So examples given in the questions that we've had, a first draft of a script that's just an idea, or a show that's been performed informally at festivals for 2 nights or less. There are some people in the chat who've done scratch performances of their piece. So basically, how much can the show exist already while still remaining eligible?
Thanks so much. Yeah, that's a really reasonable question. So I think there's a few ways to answer that. Firstly, in terms of pure eligibility, all we've said, and I think the only hard line we would apply, is that the piece can't already have been subject to a commissioning agreement or rights agreement. So ultimately, if you have been developing a play through scratch nights or done early performances of it, but there is no commissioning attached to it, and you have a partner who wants to enter into a commissioning agreement for it, that would be eligible. What I would say when thinking about making an application is how that relates to the aims of the scheme, which are to support the generation of more new work. So if you've got a play you've already written, it's already been performed, while it might technically not be something that's been commissioned, it might not look like a very strong application if it sounds like it's a piece of work that's already been made and is already being staged for audiences, because part of the aim of the project is to support more new work being made. So ultimately, that's something probably for individuals to think about in terms of how they put their best foot forward in the application. But so long as a piece hasn't been formally commissioned or rights haven't been taken up in a prior production, that would be technically eligible.
Brilliant. And at the other end of the spectrum of kind of development, then are writers, producers able to submit with an idea rather than a script that already exists?
Oh, I think we're absolutely imagining that the vast majority of these applications won't be for a script that already exists. So commissions typically are not for plays that anyone has yet done any writing around, beyond maybe, developing some early ideas. Sometimes people have written a few scenes or sketched out a treatment, but we're not expecting the majority of applications or successful applications to be plays that have already been written. The goal of the fund is to support more money being invested in paying writers to write first drafts of scripts, which is what we think commissions should be for. I think the thing that's worth saying is that having the best that you can articulate an idea or what that planning is to date, which might well not be a synopsis. It might be what the provocation for the piece is, or what the start point is, or the process that you're going to go through. But being able to talk confidently about an artistic approach will mean that you're likely to have a stronger application where it's something we can engage with. And for example, some people might be familiar with the notion of open commissions, which are where sometimes producers or venues provide a blank commission to a writer without any attachment to an idea. While I think those can be wonderful, they're unlikely to be successful here because it would be much harder for you to be able to articulate what the idea is or why we would want to support it. But we absolutely don't expect people to have to have written a full script to apply. If anything, the opposite is true.
Brilliant. And so, just to give one more example on this topic of eligibility and stage of development, say somebody had a second or third draft of a play that's been developed through a talent development scheme, but they wanted to do some further work and offer the full commission and fee for production. Would this be eligible?
Yeah, again, absolutely, and there is no problem with work that has been like developed up to a point so far. Again, I would just think about making sure you articulate clearly why the commissioning agreement will unlock a greater step in the development of that work and its route to production, so it doesn't feel like it's just additional money for a piece of work that's already basically been completed and would be going on anyway, where we will be looking to award grants in a way that is encouraging genuine new commissioning and production. But that really doesn't rule out people who've been developing work to date, especially where it feels like only through a supported commission would they be able to take further steps.
Brilliant. And just to say to anyone in the chat, if you want any kind of further clarity on these questions, please just keep commenting. Sticking with the theme of eligibility, then, we've had a couple of people ask if it's possible to submit musicals for this fund.
It is possible to submit musicals. We're absolutely fine with musicals. We should be clear that the grant payments would remain the same, and we would expect probably the grant payment to cover the book and lyrics, so the writing part of that, not the composer fees for developing the piece, which would need to be supported elsewhere.
Brilliant. And then sticking with that theme, then we've also asked, are we anticipating text-based work only, or would we be open to funding devised and physical theatre through the scheme?
Yeah, really open to devised and physical theatre. I think, we at the Royal Court believe writing can mean many things, and it doesn't have to mean a single person sat in a room with a pen or a notepad. It can be a range of things. I think the two things I would say for people looking at collaborative and devised work are, one, just making sure that it feels suitable to be structured as a commission, so that there is a commissioned party involved in the work, and that ultimately would result in a script. Whatever the process is for that. And secondly, that I'm aware that it can be the case that collaborative and devised theatre making has additional costs, particularly if the process for writing it requires extensive workshop time with other paid performers or collaborators. So again, just thinking through with your producing partner how that will be resourced if there are going to be development costs beyond the commissioning itself, where otherwise for more traditional playwriting, those costs only kick in at full production stage.
Brilliant. And one final question then regarding specific eligibility. Would a play primarily in English but with some Welsh be accepted, or does it need to be English only?
Absolutely fine. We have said that the primary mode of writing should be written English, but that absolutely wouldn't rule out either plays that include elements of other languages or plays where they're going to be produced bilingually and therefore there might be an English version and a version in Welsh entirely. So absolutely fine, and that applies both to other languages such as Welsh, but also other languages spoken in the United Kingdom, as well as British Sign Language.
Fab, thank you. So actually sticking with the word language, we've had a few people ask for a bit of clarity around what we mean by risk and ambition and what it means for a play that takes risks that the grant can support.
So thank you. I mean, this is a knotty and complex question, and as I said in my introduction, I know that risk will mean something different to different writers and different producers in different contexts, and what might seem risky at one venue might not seem risky at another. So part of that question and part of the space on the application is for you to articulate why it feels like a risk. Some examples I would give, I suppose, are if a commission was for, I don't know, a very famous writer who you happen not to have commissioned before as a venue, going onto a venue that already commissions regularly and sells lots of tickets, I would question why that felt like a risk and why there was an ask for more funding to support it in this context. Equally, I can imagine there being pieces of work that feel risky because of the ideas or content they want to explore that might feel risky in a rural touring or community context that might not feel so risky at, say, the Royal Court. So I think it will depend on where on the context that you're working in. And for example, in some cases, that could be a venue who has never commissioned an original play before and has only ever done adaptations or revivals, for whom any commission is a risk because it's a completely new and unknown thing for them to do and to present new work to their audiences. So I think risk has to ultimately be relative to context, but probably involves doing something that has an additional cost or additional risk that is more than that producer or venue might otherwise be able to do on their own or might be doing on a regular basis already.
Brill. Fab. So we've had quite a lot of questions related to the to producing. So I'll take it in two stages. First, looking at who can the producer be, and then a few questions around finding a producer. So just to begin, we've had a few people request clarity on what the difference is between a producing partner and a venue.
So absolutely, and in some cases they might be the same. But so there are some venues who also produce their own work. So there are lots of theatres that produce their own work for their own theatre or elsewhere. But there are also producers who don't have a venue. So touring companies or community-based organisations or commercial producers where they don't have their own venue. So you could apply if you're a venue who is commissioning the work for your own stage, or you could apply if you are a company without a venue who operates by touring or in partnership with other venues, where you're just commissioning the work for your company to produce. In that case, it probably would be useful to have more of a sense of either the types of venues that producer tends to tour work to, or if they've had any conversations with venues that might be interested in the work, because ultimately we would imagine that work might need a venue to be staged. But equally, there could be projects that don't involve a venue at all. There could be a commission for a piece of outdoor touring work or festival performance that doesn't involve a venue at all.
Brilliant. And someone's just asked this now, and it has been asked previously as well. What does a track record for a producing partner mean for this commission?
So I think again, a track record will mean different things in different contexts, and we're not expecting that anyone receiving this grant needs to have been around for 70 years. But I suppose some evidence that that company can and does produce work and potentially new work. So that might involve a company who's only been around for a few years, but can show that they have successfully produced a few shows in the past. What would be unlikely to do is provide a grant to a company who has never produced a piece of theatre before, because ultimately that feels like it would be too much risk at this stage to be confident that there is a likely route for the writer to seeing their work go through to production. But there could be contexts where that's true and there is overwhelming other evidence of the funding in place or the partnerships in place that make it possible. So long as that company has some record of making theatre where we can assess that they are a reasonable and likely producer for a piece of work. But there is no fixed sort of expectation on that. And again, it will vary from context to context. And you don't have to be a sort of major national institution to apply. In fact, we're highly supportive of more independent and fringe companies and producers applying for this, so long as they have some ability to demonstrate that they have an understanding of producing theatre.
Brilliant. That actually answers the question around eligibility for independent producers, so that's great. And just to kind of follow up on that, then, just for clarity for a few people in the chat, a few people have asked if they could apply with a museum, an art gallery, a human rights charity. I guess speaking to what you've just said, then there needs to be that strong link to theatre. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's fine. I actually hadn't thought about that, but I don't see a reason why, for example, a museum shouldn't do that. But you would want, and then that could be wonderful, and a museum could also be the venue. But I suppose then it would just be a question about what that museum's track record is. Have they created other performance pieces in the past? Do they have an understanding of how they would see it through? And are they used to things like commission agreements, or have they found other partners to support that?
Brill. So we've had quite a lot of people ask about the role of the writer and writers producing. So can the writer choose to produce a play or partly produce a play under this scheme, or is the producing partner solely responsible for covering costs of the production?
Let me try and unpick what that question might mean. So the producer, for the purposes of the application, needs to be a company, not a person.
Yes.
So if it were just a writer looking to self-produce work, that wouldn't meet those requirements, because it needs to be an application between a writer and a company. Of course, the writer might have their own company, in which case there might be a route there, and there might also therefore be a demonstrable track record, but there'd be some line between the writer as the commissioned writer and the company who was commissioning them. I would discourage writers from trying to put their own money into it. I would be cautious of self-exploitation. I would be cautious of us providing a grant for the first instalment, which would only need to be used by the same writer to pay themselves for their second instalment, because that won't lead to a writer being sufficiently supported to create the work. And we are looking to support and encourage, I suppose, producers to bring more resource to commissioning and invest more in writers, rather than asking writers once again to like self-subsidize creating work. However, if there is a connection between a writer and a producer, as I say, where that is a company at which the writer works, or a company that has a track record of producing that writer's work, where that writer might, for example, be the artistic director of the company, I don't think we'd see that as ineligible. However, if it is the writer's own company commissioning the work, we might ask whether or not that feels genuinely like a new project and a new relationship being created as part of the scheme.
Brilliant. So that does answer this question around if you're a writer producer, can your company partner with you as the writer?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Sticking with the idea of what is the producer, who is the producer, does a co-producer in partnership with the commissioning venue feature in the application stage, or do they have their own agreement outside of the scheme? And similarly, if there's a co-writer, do they feature in the application? Would you expect the producer to increase the commission if there's two writers? So there's a couple of steps to that question. Let's start with who features in the application stage.
Yeah, so there are obviously two aspects to that, one of which is around sort of producing collaborations, and one of which is around writing collaboration. So I can talk about both. We absolutely think there could be collaborative or co-commissions, where either that's two companies jointly commissioning a writer, or a venue and a writer commissioning a venue and a producer commissioning a writer. In that case, one of them would just need to be the lead applicant for the purposes of the application. And it's standard where, for example, there are co-commissioning agreements that one party is the lead party for contractual purposes and then has a separate agreement with the other. But if you're a producer who will be the party commissioning the writer, and you already have a venue in mind, but that venue isn't commissioning the work, then you as the producer should be applying, and there's space in that question around likely routes to productions or partners to talk about the venues you might be working with. And if it's a joint co-commission where you know that some of the funding for like future phases of the commission will be subject to an agreement and paid for by a co-commissioning partner, that's fine, and you can include that there. But you should work out who the lead commissioning partner is for the purposes of the application and entering into a contractual commissioning agreement with the writer. In terms of co-writers and collaborators, again, that's absolutely fine. And there's a section on the form where, again, you have to choose one writer to be the lead applicant. That might be obvious from the way a project is being developed collaboratively, or it might not be. There might be two equal co-writers, and you would just need to pick one of them in order to be the application partner and contracting partner. But that section in the first part of the application form, after providing those sort of singular contact details as the point of contact for the playwright, has a box where you can articulate if it's a co-written piece or being made in collaboration with other people, and you can give us their names and details, and that would be completely understood as part of the application, but we just need one person to be the main contact point for the sake of the application. The final part of that question, I think, if I remember it correctly, was around whether or not if there are collaborators, they would need to be paid more. That ultimately is a question for you and the producer and what your process is. But if there are more costs, either because the commissioning partner wants to pay additional money to a co-writing group, or because there are collaborators who need like fees as part of development, similar to devising or collaborative processes, again, that would be something for the producer to look at, how they're able to resource those costs.
Fantastic. Got a few more practical questions on who the producer can be, and then we'll move on to diving in a little bit more into proportion of funding and questions specifically around who takes what money. So just a couple of practical questions then. As a London-based writer, does my producer also have to make work out of London, or can they be based elsewhere?
I'm not sure I fully understood the question, but we're completely happy to support writers in London and producers and venues in London. As I said in the application, like as part of our balancing criteria, we want to make sure that we are supporting a spread of locations. So we wouldn't want to just be supporting work in London or just be supporting work in any other region. but there's no eligibility issue around where people are based, so long as they're based in the United Kingdom and the writer and the producer don't have to be based in the same area.
Brill. Um, as a producing partner, brackets theatre company, would you advise that it's stronger to have a venue partnership lined up for the production, or is it okay to be starting ideas for venues rather than having this secured? Stating ideas for venues rather than having this secured.
Yeah, I think, thank you. I think that will depend. Ultimately, it's a question about how strong the application is. And so there's a few answers to that. One is, I suppose, knowing that you've had a venue in place is always going to help answer that question of whether or not there's a route to production. But you might be able to answer that in a different way by saying you've had conversations with multiple venues, or you've produced, X number of shows in the past and they've gone on at these venues, and therefore it's sort of like there is just a high likelihood that you're clearly a producing partner with a relationship with venues where you're likely to be able to get a production on. I think the thing we're most cautious of is not supporting a commissioning partner who ultimately won't be able to secure a venue. So you could demonstrate that by having a venue in place, or being able to demonstrate conversations you've already had with venues, or a track record of regularly working at venues. The other thing I suppose that's true is that's only one part of the application. So while we wouldn't want to support an application that we felt had no route to production, for example, a brilliant idea with genuine risk and a clear sense of commitment, but where the venue isn't quite confirmed, is probably more likely to be supported than a very boring idea for a play that doesn't feel risky at all, but definitely has a venue signed up. So it will always be a balance, and different applications will have different strengths. But I would think about, to the extent that you can, finding the best way to signal that you clearly are likely to be able to secure a venue or context for producing the work, whether that's by having one confirmed, conversations already ongoing, or your track record.
Brilliant. So a couple more questions in this area then. You mentioned a producing partner would need evidence of funds or reserves to see the project through to completion. Does this have to be money in the bank, or can it be anticipated funds?
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. So I suppose there are two parts to this, one of which is around the commission and one of which is around a production. So again, this will probably be familiar to most people on the call, but commissions are normally structured in at least 3 and sometimes more installments, where there is a fee on signature, the upfront fee, which is what our grant will cover. So there is no upfront cost to the producer. There's normally then a second installment, and they can be different amounts, and you'll be able to see that in the commissioning agreement you agree to, where the producer is bound to pay a delivery fee. So assuming the writer completes the play, which of course they might not, but assuming that we cover the cost of that first commission payment, and the writer then completes the play and returns it to the producer, there is normally a second fee at that point. It's not normally a huge amount of money, but we wouldn't want to support a venue or a producer who wouldn't be able to, at that point, meet their contractual obligations. And that's why we're looking at reserves or budgets. So an organisation that clearly has enough money in the bank that they can meet that, or has annual budgets where they always have money for writer support that could clearly be directed at that. But that's the lower bar that we want to make sure that they can absolutely meet that obligation. We would be cautious of people who were articulating that they would need to undertake more fundraising, which of course might not be successful, just to meet that basic contractual obligation as part of the commission. That said, producing the show will obviously involve far greater costs. And we absolutely aren't requiring that people already have that money in the bank. So we absolutely could be supporting companies who know that they can afford to pay the second payment on the commission if they need to. But then ultimately, any other payments on the commission are only subject to a confirmation of production, which is a choice that sits with the producing partner. And any other production costs would be further afield. And we know that there are lots of brilliant producers who have to raise money from a whole range of sources in order to get that work on, and have a track record of doing so. Again, that could be demonstrated by regular budgets and knowing where some of that money is coming from, but it could simply be demonstrated by producing partners showing that they have successfully in the past been able to fundraise. And while there'd always be some uncertainty about that, they could evidence that they were relatively likely to be able to do that if it was a success. I think the only situation where we'd be really cautious about awarding a grant on the basis of funding was either one, where it felt like there wasn't enough certainty that the producer could meet their basic contractual obligations under the commission to pay the second payment, or two, where they would need to fundraise in order to stage a full production and had never done so before at any scale, and therefore weren't able to show that they had some likelihood of being able to do that. Because again, our goal here is to support writers getting their plays on stage.
Fab. And a few more then. So can you have a venue supported by a financial producer?
I'm not sure, Rachel, sorry, that I fully understand that question. I'm not sure who
Let
asked
me
it, and if they're able to ask it in a different way. A venue
fab.
supported by a financial producer doesn't quite make sense to me.
If whoever asked that, if you want to pop a bit of detail and send it directly to me in the chat, we'll come back to that question. We had quite a lot of people then ask about finding a producer, and actually, someone in the chat, Aaron, I believe it was, very kindly has posted a link to a resource to find producers, which I'll try and include in the follow-up email to this session where you also get the recording. So thank you very much, Aaron, for that. But Will, I wanted to ask you as well. We've got a few people saying that they've regularly self-produced and they'd be unsure as to how to find a producer or company to put a joint application in. Do you have any kind of advice there?
Yeah, it can be really hard, and I completely appreciate it. There's a few things you can do. Obviously, you can look at things like the various like producing programs, so both like producing MAs where you can get in touch and see if like you can reach out to graduates, or things like the Society of London Theatre Stage 1 program. You could also be talking to any venues. You know, if you have been having work that has been self-produced, but it's been going on at other venues, you could talk to those venues and say, look, would you be interested in taking the next step with me and working as a partner with me, where we can collaborate, but where you'd be the producing partner? And hopefully, the offer of the fact that that would only happen if there were a grant to support it would ease those conversations. But I totally sympathise and I have a huge amount of respect for self-producing writers. And of course, we have lots of other different programs that are designed to support writers in different ways, but we are looking for this one to, I suppose, be something that can incentivize producers who otherwise aren't taking the risk of commissioning new work to do so. So we would hope that if you can be thinking about an application, it might help you open up conversations with other venues or partners who you've worked with and actually say, look, actually, this could be the moment to provide more support for me as a writer by working on this grant application.
Brill. And Aaron's just posted that link again in the chat for anyone who missed it. So head on over there to click on that link.
That's really kind.
Very kind, thank you. We just had another question as well around practicalities of who a producer could be. Could a drama school qualify as a producer?
Yes, again, subject to all the other conditions. I don't think we tend not to. Well, our goal here is not to construct eligibility that makes it harder for people. So if you have a drama school who want to produce a play and they have a route to, or commission a play and they have a route towards production and they clearly have an evidence of having produced plays before, then absolutely fine.
Brilliant. We've got some. Just someone's just quickly asked again in the chat around does it have to be 100% in English? They're looking at using English and Welsh. Just to Will answered that question earlier. I appreciate some of you dropping in and out. Totally fine to have bilingual applications. Fab, we've got a bit of clarity on that question earlier. So a venue that would require a more, I have a venue that would require a more commercial producer to support the theatre hire cost as a route to production with a view to transfer at a later date to a commercial venue.
So it sounds like in that case, and if whoever's asking this question wants to or feels comfortable to unmute and ask them, then that's absolutely fine. But it sounds like in that case, the venue isn't the producer, the commercial producer is the person who would be commissioning and producing the work, which again is absolutely fine. So we're completely open to commercial producers or independent producers who aren't the venues. And indeed, in many cases, as you'll know, the producers of work are not the same as the venues. There are some venues that produce their own work, but if you're working with a commercial producer who wants to commission the work and where their route to production would ultimately be having to hire a space in order to do it, that's absolutely fine.
Brilliant. Just again, a few people have asked in the chat. Yes, the recording will be sent round after the session. So now we've got a couple of questions around who is the scheme likely to support. So people in the chat are asking if there's anything specific or in particular when it comes to the idea of the play itself, more likely to support early or mid-career writers. Is there any specific criteria there?
Yeah, I suppose part of the answer, and this might not be helpful, is it's the first time we've run this scheme. So probably this time next year, we'll be able to give slightly more feedback from how we found applications and what sorts of decisions we made. The scheme is absolutely not. There isn't a secret criteria that we've not articulated, and we know that that mid-career writers can face just as much challenges as early career writers, and are really open to both. And as I say, I know that what the goals of the scheme are will mean different things in different contexts, and we're really open to that and hearing from you, I suppose. Ultimately, asking the question of writers and producers, What would you want to do if somebody would cover the first payment for you? What leap of faith, what more ambitious project, what risk would you want to take in your context that would genuinely excite you, if there was somebody able to cover the first step for you? And actually, just honestly answering that question is likely to be the most useful thing. I think trying to work out what we might want and write something that isn't necessarily in your own voice or your own genuine excitement is probably less likely to be supported than something that feels like it honestly comes from a place of excitement and ambition. I think we want this scheme to be supporting a range of work. I would be disappointed if this scheme ends up funding 6 commissions that are all broadly similar topics and similar scale venues from writers of similar backgrounds or career stages. The goal is to open that pipeline for a more diverse, wider range of nationwide writers to have routes to production at more theatres across the country in a range of contexts. So long as it feels to you like there's something really exciting or different or risky, in whatever way that might mean, that you know you would love to do but aren't able to do unless somebody is able to provide a bit of upfront money to get through that first step of being paid to put pen to paper, that's what we want to support, and we want that actively to support a wide range of different rather than similar things.
Brilliant. Before we go on to talking about the practical questions around proportion of funding and what these fees actually mean, just to say that Georgia has very kindly popped some advice in the chat regarding finding partner venues. So do head into the chat and take a look at that, because that's been very kindly posted. So for those of you asking about how to find a venue or producer, there's some information there. So now we're going to take a look at a few questions that have come through regarding proportion of funding. How much would the delivery fee typically be?
So it varies from agreement to agreement. And so if you are looking at applying for this, I would look at what that agreement might be. And as I say, we've indicated that there are different agreements where the first payment is different. And then it can vary. And these things are also often subject to negotiation by unions. Normally, the delivery fee, the second payment, is no more than the signature fee. So a common split is either a third, a third, a third, where it's a third on signature, a third on delivery, and then a final third if the producer goes ahead with the production and they're not required to make that payment. They can choose not to go ahead with production. Sometimes that split is 40, 40, 20. Some agreements also split out a decision to produce from a final acquisition payment. But in general, it's either the same as or slightly less than the signature payment. So if you're applying for £4,000 for the signature payment under an applicable UK Theatre MRSL2 agreement, you're probably liable for around the same amount on delivery. So our funding will generally cover half of those costs before entering full production.
Brilliant, thank you.
Those rates up really easily. They're all on the Writers Guild website. So if you just navigate to the Writers Guild website and search, you can find the different rate cards.
So we've had a question oh, sorry, someone can ask a question. Did I hear a voice? Maybe not. Sorry, I'm hearing things. For independent producers, is this fund only to be destined for a first instalment of a bigger commission, or can it be to fulfill 80 to 100% of the full commission total? For example, a 1-hour play commissioned at ITC rates.
No, we will only provide a grant for the first instalment. And as I noted in the presentation, if that is for a short play where slightly lower commissioning agreements apply, we'll look at adjusting that amount. The point of the scheme, I suppose, is to stretch our resources as far as possible to encourage producers to also take a risk with us. So as I articulated, where the full cost of a commission before choosing to produce, we would be covering at least, if not more than half of that. We are looking for the scheme to support encouraging producers to bring additional resource to the table to invest in writers and to support writers who, I suppose, in doing so, can demonstrate their ability to provide funding for a full production in future. So I'm afraid we wouldn't be able to sort of adjust those grant amounts so that they were covering the full commission.
And then someone just asked to follow up there, just to clarify then, this is joint funding?
So at the point that we make a grant, the only payment that anyone is liable for is the first signature payment. And that delivery fee would only be applicable at some point further down the line in future when the writer has written the play or if they end up writing the play. So we will provide a grant that will cover 100% as I said, with a little bit more, 100% of the uh, first payment of a commission, and we're looking for that to go to producers who are willing and able to support the second payment.
Brilliant, thank you. Then a couple of questions have come in around how that grant could possibly fluctuate depending on the length of the play or how many writers there are. Could you just give a bit of detail around how that grant could be
Yeah.
reduced or increased?
So again, that's probably something, if you know the details of what you're doing, to look at specifically around Writers Guild rates. But there's two elements to that question, one of which was length of play. So some union agreements have a smaller grant amount if they're explicitly commissioning a short play, which is normally defined as either less than an hour or less than 70 minutes. Now, it could be that you enter into a full commission and then it turns out that the best version of the play is only 68 minutes long. And that's absolutely fine, and the writer would still get a full commission payment. But if you know that you're explicitly commissioning upfront something to be something defined as a short play, then the commissioning fees are slightly less, and we might make the grant amount slightly less. But you'll be able to look at that, and it's not something that would change after the fact. So that would be designed as part of the commission if it's intended to be a short play. It's not a situation where a producer gets some money back if the play turns out to be short. The second aspect of that was co-writers. So the Writers Guild doesn't have separate rate cards for co-writers, and obviously it can depend hugely on what that co-writing relationship is. Some co-writers might feel that it's twice the work for them to write it. Some might feel that it is a shared endeavour and that actually that allows them to work it around other jobs, and that therefore they don't need more money for it. But if you as a writer working with a collaborator feel that the commission rate that's being offered isn't enough for you as a co-writer, then that's a conversation you'd need to have with the venue. But there aren't like set unionized rates for additional fees where there are collaborators enough.
Well, we've had a few people ask in different ways around what the split between the writer and producing company is for the signature fee. So, for example, how would your 6K be split between the two?
So our grant will be paid to the producer. The producer will enter into a commissioning agreement with the writer, and the producer will then pay the writer the signature fee. Our grants are almost, but slightly more than the amount of that signature fee. The reason they're not precise is because those rates increase each year as part of union negotiations. And for example, I know what the TNC rates are right now for the current financial year, but because people might not fully enter into that agreement or make that payment until April or May of next year, there might be a small uplift, and those rates haven't been agreed or negotiated by the unions yet. So it might be, for example, that the producer receives a grant of £6,000, but the final rate for the first instalment of the commissioning fee is £5,800, in which case they would be paying £5,800 directly to the writer. So there's a small amount of overage, which ensures that producers aren't out of pocket on that first instalment if there are delays or union negotiated changes in those rates, and otherwise can be put towards small expenses, whether that's meetings or other costs that might be incurred at the upfront stage. But essentially, while the grant is paid to the producer in order for them to enter into a commissioning agreement, almost all, 95% plus of the grant is destined for the writer, but is paid through the producer in order to facilitate them entering into a legal commissioning agreement.
Fab. We've not got long to go now, so I'm going to skip ahead to some of the practical questions that you've asked. So someone's asked if they aren't successful this year, can they apply again next year? Is this a one-time trial? Would it be relevant in 2027?
So we're committed to running the scheme annually. I mean, obviously, long term, forever is a very long time, but we know we already have the money in place to run it in 2027. So it's not a one-off trial. We are aiming to run the scheme annually, and we know we'll be running it again the following year. And we won't be making any restrictions around whether or not people can reapply, whether they were successful or unsuccessful.
Brill. Had a couple of people asked about the relationship with the Royal Court stage itself, and if there's a possibility of transfer, would grants ever be produced at the Royal Court as a venue?
So that's not part of the design of the scheme, and the scheme is not a commission from us, and we want the commissions to belong to other producers and to support, I suppose, other producers taking work forward. Obviously, we're always going to see new work, and if we see new work that we think is good, and we sometimes have conversations with people about bringing it here, but that isn't a designed part of the scheme and wouldn't apply differently to plays supported through this scheme as they would plays developed or commissioned in any other context with or without our support.
Brill. We've had a few people ask again for the time frames when we have to apply by. Is it rolling? Just to say you'll receive the slideshow which has them on, but you could head to the website. But
Midnight on the
yeah,
23rd of January.
there it is. And you'll also get a transcript of the chat for those asking. That comes as part of this. Fantastic. What else have we got in here? If you were successful, could the grant be used to R&D, or should the money be used only for writing?
If you're successful, you'll need to enter a legal commissioning agreement with the writer or writers. And that will include a contractual first instalment. Ultimately, what they use that for is to an extent up to them, but the intention of this is to put money into the pockets of playwrights. So if you know that there are going to be greater R&D costs, we would expect them to be being supported by a producer, not used to take money away from paying the writer to write the work.
Brilliant, thank you. Regarding diversity, is the planned diversity of cast and other creatives taken into account?
I suppose it might be a relevant factor if it felt like it was contributing to the artistic proposition overall and why you wanted to do it or why it constituted a risk for you. But no, and we wouldn't know about that at this stage or be able to be certain about that at this stage in any case. So this, for the purposes of this award, that balancing criteria just asks about the diversity of the playwright.
Brilliant. Someone's asked a question regarding evaluation. So what kind of monitoring, reporting or evaluation will be expected from successful recipients, for example, updates, shared reading, etc.?
Yeah, so we'll ask for updates, and we would hope that no one will mind us dropping a line if we haven't heard from you for a while and seeing how it's going. If you end up doing sharings or indeed a full production, we would expect invitations in order for us to be able to attend and see the work. And we're not, if we fund somebody, it's going to be because we're excited about them as an artist and their work. So I imagine we will want to stay in touch, and I would hope that would be mutual. We haven't designed full evaluation at this point, but we're likely to, the request will be for permission to contact you for follow-up. So we will be interested in talking to people in a year's time and saying, how did this grant affect things? Has it helped move something forward? Was there something about the process that didn't work that we could do better?
Brilliant. Should there be a proposed timescale attached to the application for the delivery of a first draft, for example? And should there be a loose proposal of timescale supplied for any future development beyond the first draft?
I think if that's something you can provide, then that's really helpful and helps provide a stronger answer to the question around the route to production, where we mentioned in that application guidance that timescale is one thing you could include. That doesn't mean that if you can't be certain of a timescale, we wouldn't support the work, because there could be other things like knowing that you have sufficient venue relationships or other plans, and we know that plays can take longer or shorter times to write than people anticipate. So it's also not something we would hold people to, but an indication of that could be really useful to be able to say, for example, what year you're imagining doing it, or particularly if that has relevance to other funding or other planning for the company.
Brill. We just have one last question, which is around the writing sample. And does this need to be another play, or can it be a screenplay or script?
Yeah, so if you get through to shortlisting, that's when we would ask for a writing sample, and that could be a play or another sample of writing. And it could be that you think your strongest foot forward is to show us a piece of writing for screen or something else, so that's absolutely fine.
Fantastic. Hopefully, I've managed to group those questions together well enough to cover everything that's been asked in the chat. When you receive your recording of this, if there is anything that you felt wasn't answered, do just reply, and we can try and get a little written response to you. But otherwise, I'll hand you back to Will now.
Thank you so much, Rachel, and thank you everyone for being part of this and for asking all of those really excellent questions. I'm just putting back on the screen a reminder that if you do have any further questions, do have a look at that FAQ section of our website, where we're trying to include things, and as I say, we're adding things to it if we get a question from somebody via email that we think might apply to others. But again, just reiterating our email address, which is commissioningscheme@royalcourttheatre.com, and if you do have any queries, we will get back to you, and we've been getting back to people relatively quickly where people have been coming through with questions. I suppose the only other thing to say is, again, thank you for coming. I hope it's useful. I hope that the process of applying isn't too arduous. We've worked quite hard to try and keep it relatively simple and relatively short as an application form. And mostly, we just really look forward to hearing about your ideas and your plans. So thank you so much. We never discussed how we'd end the webinar, but I think here endeth the webinar. Thank you very much to everyone for coming.
End it with a song, Will. I'm joking.
Thank you very much, everyone. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Friend.